right, football season is over, and so now we're going to discuss the New York Rangers. So, for this episode, we're going to talk about really what has happened to this point in the season. Typically, I'm probably going to be doing, recaps after games is going to be the norm, with some other special things as well, depending on what's going on. But the Rangers played the Islanders tonight, and this was their 11th game. It's a 56-game season with 8 teams in their division, and the top 4 teams qualify for the playoffs. It's going to be a weird year, just like anything else. No fans, at least in the Eastern Division, no fans. And for most arenas, you're not seeing any. And there's already been postponements. The Devils and Sabres have been hit hard by COVID, and Minnesota. So, maybe they'll go by points percentage when it's all said and done. And we've seen the other sports, they're able to get through it. So maybe the NHL will do the same, but these same issues are still existing with what's going on in the world. But for the Rangers, it's been an up and down season so far, and there's been a lot of interesting storylines. And I think going into this year, there was a lot of high hopes in terms of the fact that they had won the lottery and got the number 1 overall pick in Alexis Lafreniere. And the year before that, they had the number 2 overall pick with Kaapo Kakko. There's been a lot of turnover, though. I mean, ever since the Rangers put out their letter to the fans literally 3 years ago today, and that they were going to be basically rebuilding, whatever you want to call it, retool, build. They pretty much gutted the whole team to the point where Henrik Lundqvist was bought out. His contract was bought out over the offseason. They traded Mark Stahl. Jesper Fast left to the Carolina Hurricanes. So this is definitely a different looking team. Not so much from last season, but just over the last few years. The Rangers of the mid-2010s, the ones that made the finals in 2014 or, had Eastern Conference appearances, won the President's Trophy. The core of those teams is basically gone. Chris Kreider is the only one that still remains. He was given a long-term contract, and we'll see if that pays off. Personally, I have my doubts, but I guess you do need to have some veterans. This is the youngest team in the league. And you're seeing that. But it's funny, as we kind of discuss here, it's not really so much the young players. Some have certainly struggled, but it's actually more the veterans that have been a little bit of an issue here. But like I said, a lot of optimism, I think, regarding this team. They were extremely hot last season, and then the pause happened, and they got swept in 3 games by Carolina in the bubble in Toronto. And that was pretty eye-opening. Not really all that surprising, but they just were smothered. Carolina was a better team, and this should have been something that they learned from. And I think, from what I've seen so far, they've made improvements in certain areas, but there's other things that are a little concerning. So let's jump into sort of a quick summary of what we've seen so far. So game 1 against the Islanders was a disaster. That was the worst game they've played this season by far. Just absolutely awful. And, a lot of overreactions. Fans were freaking out after game 1. They got shut out. It was really bad. Game 2, total reversal. Great game for the Rangers. They shut the Islanders out. Now, mind you, Varlamov was in goal for the Islanders in game 1. Sorokin, the rookie, was in goal for game 2. And that made a big difference. But either way, it didn't matter which goal he was in. The Rangers played a very good game. And that probably was the best game they've played all season. Although there were some other good ones along the way. So at this point, they're 1-1. One really bad game, one really good game. And then they played New Jersey, and they lost in regulation at MSG. Jack Hughes had a really good game. And that was one where they fell behind, and they put up a ton of shots that night. A ridiculous amount. It was around 50 or so. It's been a couple weeks now, so I can't quite remember the exact number, but they did play a good game and Georgiev played that night. Now, Georgiev got the shutout in game 2. So they went back to him. Now, at this point, Tony DeAngelo was a healthy scratch after the first game. He took a penalty late and kind of mouthed off to the ref. And so, whether it was right or wrong, David Quinn makes DeAngelo a healthy scratch. And they played very well in game 2, so they went with the same exact lineup in game 3. And they lose this game, so he's reinserted into the lineup the next game, which was they had 2 games against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. So at this point, they're 1-2. They go back to Shesterkin. And at this point in time, Jack Johnson has been, they bring him in kind of to replace Mark Stahl. Has not worked out at all. And he eventually gets injured. And they've played a little bit better since that, but he certainly struggled in one of the Pittsburgh games badly. I don't remember. I know he was a healthy scratch. It might have been in the second Pittsburgh game. But I remember one of them, he certainly messed up. Him and DeAngelo were the third defensive pairing. And really what was bad in these Pittsburgh games, and had been a bit of a problem, was blowing leads. So the Rangers had a 3-1 lead against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh would tie it up in the third and would win it in the shootout. In that game, Philip Hedl was fantastic. Philip Hedl had a great goal and was just all over the place. I think it was honestly one of the best games I've seen from him, and reason to be really excited about what he's bringing to the table. And that game, Kakko had scored his second goal of the season in that game. Okay, but with the back-to-backs, it can be a little bit confusing in terms of, they had back-to-backs at Pittsburgh, back-to-backs at Buffalo, but he had been scoring early and mostly has been playing good hockey, not really getting the results on the score sheet. But the Rangers blew this lead. And then the next game, a situation where they blow another lead and Pittsburgh scores with a minute and a half left to win. So the Rangers get no points. That was tough. To only get 1 point in those 2 games was not great. And then the Rangers would go to Buffalo and they would be winning at 1.21 and they would lose it 3-2. Another tough loss. And Georgiev played that game. And K'Andre Miller would score his first NHL goal in that game. Mind you, K'Andre Miller has been playing very, very well. As a rookie, coming straight from college, what he's done has been nothing short of spectacular. K'Andre Miller has been great. So he got his first goal in that game. Then the next Buffalo game, they would win in overtime. Alexis Lafreniere gets his first NHL goal, his first NHL point. That was his only goal and point through 11 games. And I think you get kind of spoiled with the McDavids and the Matthews and these other number 1 overall picks really coming in the league and taking it by storm. Lafreniere has not done that. And there's things to be encouraged by. But to me, it's been disappointing so far. It doesn't mean he's obviously a teenager. I think he'll be just fine, but I definitely expected more. So, like I said, a bit of an up and down. Almost every Ranger game that was played, except those first 2 Islander games, every game since has been pretty much down to the wire. So, they would, like I said, they would win that second Buffalo game. And at this point, Jack Johnson, he's hurt with a groin injury. Colin Blackwell actually made a really great play. He's kind of another journeyman type. They've had a few of these guys. Kevin Rooney, Colin Blackwell, Phil DiGiuseppe, who have done a nice job in a bottom 6 role. I think those players have done okay. And then they played home against Pittsburgh. So a lot of Pittsburgh Penguins games early on. So at this point, their record, they're just coming off the win against the Sabres. At that point in time, it was 2-4-1, right? You had the Islanders, yes, 2-4-1 at this stage. And this was a back and forth game. And this is when things kind of get really interesting, more off ice. Back and forth game. Georgiev was in that. This was the last game that Alex Georgiev has played. And it's been, except that shot against the Islanders, it's been a rough season for him. Small sample size, but I think where the Rangers kind of saw this as a 1A, 1B, I think it's clear that Igor Shesterkin is the number one goalie, and Alex Georgiev is simply the backup. You're going to need him to play. The Rangers have a lot of games coming up, but they would lose in overtime. Sidney Crosby gets the game-winning goal in overtime. Another blown lead by the Rangers where they had a lead at end of 2 against Pittsburgh again. These Pittsburgh games really should have went in a better result. They deserve better, but they have not been clutch. So they lose that game, and on the play, on that last goal by Crosby, bit of a mix-up between DeAngelo and Georgiev behind the net, which would result in a goal about 10 to 15 seconds later from Crosby. So apparently, there was a scuffle between DeAngelo and Georgiev after the game. I think punches were thrown. There's a lot of rumors out there as far as what exactly happened, but that's kind of the gist of it. I don't know. DeAngelo might have chirped him, and then Georgiev might have swung, or there's been different reports. But the next morning, Tony DeAngelo is placed on waivers. And that would be it. He cleared waivers, and he will no longer be a New York Ranger. Tony DeAngelo gone. And this needs conversation. So they acquired Tony DeAngelo from the Arizona Coyotes a few years ago. And it was kind of one of the first moves. Honestly, it might have been the first move, even before the letter came out that they were going to do this rebuild. The Rangers traded away Derek Stepan and Antti Raanta for a first-round pick, which ended up being Lias Andersson, and he's since been traded, and Tony DeAngelo. And DeAngelo last season on the ice, was very good. Sure, he's not the best defensively, but really, he was top 5 in points among defensemen, great on the power play, really just a force. And his D partner was Mark Stahl. And this season, this offseason, he was a restricted free agent, and they gave him a 2-year contract. And I think that the terms were fair. It was $4.8 million per season. It really wasn't anything too egregious, but there's been a lot of things. He's a very opinionated person. Certainly on social media, he is a pro-Trump guy, and certainly optics-wise, the things that he says and does, it's not a great look. Obviously, the Ranger fan base, I think, mostly disagrees with his political takes, but that's just one thing. Look, he's entitled to say what he wants. I think he takes it too far sometimes, but that's just one thing. But then when you're now in a situation where he's getting into fights with teammates and, he's not getting along with the coaching staff and he has a history. Again, we don't know everything, but it all kind of adds up, and to the point where this guy is gone and they're going to try to trade him. I don't know what they're going to be able to get back for him, but it's amazing how quickly it turned. I mean, again, this guy was an asset last season. He really was. And you do have Adam Fox, who is very gifted offensively well and better defensively. They're like size-wise and right-handedness, they're similar. And there are some other Rangers defensemen in the pipeline. So, but right now, as far as no DeAngelo goes, it's definitely not what you want. Because this third pair is just a problem. Because Libor Hajek, who has been recently called up, really struggled in this Islander game, which we'll get into. But they're using guys pretty much that they didn't expect to. With injuries to Jack Johnson, with an injury to Brendan Smith, who had been filling in, and with mixed results. He had been okay at certain points, but that third pair just in general was bad. The Rangers have really been leaning on Ryan Lindgren and Adam Fox, as well as Keandre Miller and Jacob Trouba. So DeAngelo is out of the mix completely now, and that's definitely been a big headline. So DeAngelo's out, and the Rangers kind of picked up their play a bit. The second Penguin game, they would win in regulation, and that was, I think, it was a good third period they played. That was a situation where I guess they were just due against Pittsburgh. They get that win. And then they beat Washington, also in regulation. So they are turning things around. Shesterkin in goals is getting better, way better. Artemi Panarin continues. After the Washington game, through 10 games, he had 15 points, which is remarkable when you consider the fact that, he's playing with Ryan Strome, who, because of Panarin, has done better recently, but Ryan Strome I'm not a big fan of his. And so the Rangers tonight against the Islanders played a tough game. They definitely did, it was far from their worst game of the season. They really, I thought, had some chances, and they played a pretty well-structured defensive game, but against Barry Trotz and the Islanders, it's just not going to be easy because they like that kind of grinded out, low-scoring type of game. That fits their style of play. And the Rangers had their chances. Artemi Panarin has a breakaway in the third, stopped by Varlamov. Zibanejad has a chance, stopped by Varlamov. So Rangers get shut out tonight. The Islanders' fourth line, or whatever you want to call it. It's not really their fourth line, but it's the Cizikas, Martin, Clutterbuck line gets 2 goals at the end. The Rangers find a way to get no points. It's things like that where for the Rangers, you have to find a way to get these games to overtime and get points. And I think the overall thing with the Rangers, they're 4-5-2 now. Not a great record. There's a lot of season to go, but I think with them, as much as you'd like the playoffs to be in the conversation this year, and we'll see how close they get, it's not my expectation. So, especially for what I've seen so far. And let's talk about some of the big keys as to why I feel this way. Mika Zibanejad has been terrible. This guy last year had the highest goals per game in the league. This guy had 40-plus goals in less than 60 games. I want to say less than 60 games. He was playing at a ridiculous level. You knew he wasn't going to do that again. There was no way that he was going to be able to live up to that, but he, tested positive for COVID before the season. There's a number of reasons potentially as to why he might not be playing well, but there's no excuse at this point anymore. He had an assist on an empty net goal against Washington a couple nights ago. It's unacceptable play for Mika Zibanejad, who's been one of my favorite players since he's joined the Rangers. They acquired him from Ottawa for Derek Brassard in just an amazing trade. One of the best trades, probably the best trade by Jeff Gorton. And if he continues to play like this, the Rangers are going nowhere this season. So that is extremely concerning. When I watch these games night in, night out, he has been one of the worst players on the ice. There's just no way around it. Been terrible. And this is one of their best players. He is. So he's been bad. Let's go through, different players here, right? So just, Ryan Strome, like I said, he's their second line center right now. And really, if he didn't play with Artemi Panarin, I'm not really sure what he'd be doing. The guy's he's an NHL player, obviously. There's no doubt about that. He's nowhere near, that top pick that the Islanders drafted years ago. That's just not him, right? I think ideally, he's one of those second or third line tweener type players. And when you play with Artemi Panarin, I have to give Panarin the credit here. I think Strome really is he benefits from what the bread man can bring. And, Capo Caco is playing on a line with Panarin and Strome right now. And I think for him, I like what I've seen, but, the production isn't quite there. He has 2 goals. He played really well against Washington the other night. He was a big reason why the Rangers won that game. So he's definitely playing a smarter defensive game, and you like to see that. It takes some guys slower than others. So I'm, definitely not going to jump the gun on Kakko just yet, but you do hope to see a little bit more production, no question. And as far as the Kreider, Zibanejad, Buchnevich line, Buchnevich, I think, has had a mostly good season. We've seen him kill penalties now. He's a main penalty kill on this team, which he went from basically never killing penalties in the beginning of his career to now, like I said, being a main key cog there, and has been successful in doing so. So I like his game. Again, definitely a more responsible game, which is what they need. Kreider, I don't, especially after they drafted Lafreniere. Now, they didn't know this was going to happen, but it was a long contract, and I know that you do need some veteran presence on this team, so it can't just be all young players, but I think Kreider, that contract, is going to be a problem down the line. It is. He's, sometimes he scores big goals, but at the same time, he really is kind of invisible certain games. He's a streaky player. He has 4 goals, which is decent, no assists, but I think Kreider, and mostly Zibanejad, but Kreider and Zibanejad, the 2 top candidates to be named captain. And I'm glad there is no captain on this team. They shouldn't just name one to name one. There is none on this team right now. They need to pick up their play. In terms of the bottom 6, like I said, it's a shame. Philip Hedl seemed like he was on his way. And I think with the way that our centermen have been playing, I think that Hedl would have really been it would have been interesting to see what he could have done with Panarin if he wanted to break up Strome and Panarin. I think it would have given them a lot more options, and he's going to be out for a while. I believe it was either an arm or a wrist injury. They said it was an upper body injury, but it seems like he's going to be out for a while still. Brett Howden, really, he is just not exactly what you were hoping for when you traded for him from Tampa. That Ryan McDonagh, JT Miller trade, we didn't really, and I say we, being the Rangers, as if I'm on the team, but that is not really a great return. Now, there was a couple of draft picks, one being Nils Lundqvist, who's a defenseman, and there's high praise for him in terms of what he's done in Sweden and what he can bring. But in terms of what was received, and we've seen, Vlad Nemestikov wasn't really great and was traded away, and Brett Howden and Libor Hajek, it's been underwhelming for me. I think anyone would agree with that. So Howden, really, he's devolved into a fourth-line center who can kill penalties. That's pretty much what his ceiling is. Really, this was a guy who I think his best year with the Rangers was his rookie year. He showed that he had a little bit of scoring potential. That's kind of dried up now. He's a hardworking player, but I don't love him. And, Brandon Lemieux, you need an agitator, but I think another guy who might have been better when they initially traded for him from Winnipeg. I think that he's someone that is useful, but he's really a fourth-line player as well. Again, like I said before, Di Giuseppe works hard. He belongs in the fourth line. Kevin Rooney, who they brought in from the Devils, solid player. Him and Howden, honestly, are a bit redundant. So, they're really both fourth-line centers. Julien Gauthier, you see the talent, but I don't really know if it's going to ever translate. He's got all, the tools, but I'm not really optimistic about him being someone that's going to be productive in the NHL. And with Alexis Lafreniere, only 1 goal through 11 games. And he's working hard out there, and I know it's tough when, he's playing right now with Brett Howden as a center, but he had chances with, again, Mika Zibanejad's been so poor that doesn't help anything, but I think Lafreniere, you would like to see a lot more from him as the season progresses. And that's going to be the key, is how are some of these players going to progress as the season goes on? It's not so much about the wins and losses, but how are the young kids going to improve? Let's talk about some young kids that are really doing well, and that's mostly on the back end, on the blue line. Adam Fox is steady, solid. I mean, who would have thought this kid from Jericho, Long Island, grows up a Ranger fan, and now he's on the team, and he's playing 25 minutes a night. He is, no disrespect to K'Andre Miller, and we'll get into him. Fox, he's their best defenseman. He is their best overall defenseman. And his D partner, Ryan Lindgren, it's a good match. Those two have been definitely very dependable since they were put together. You wonder what Lindgren would do without Fox, but I'm going to give Lindgren credit. He's physical. He's not the fastest, but he's certainly not slow. And I think this is a guy who you could definitely see hanging around with the Rangers. He's young. So I think that pair has been really, really good, and David Quinn has relied on them in a lot of situations. Both of them are killing penalties. Adam Fox had not killed penalties last season. He is now a main penalty killer. K'Andre Miller and Jacob Trouba, they also receive a lot of minutes. I think K'Andre Miller has been so much better than anyone could have ever anticipated. This kid is going to be legit. He already is. He makes mistakes, and he has such a good reach, and he's so good with his stick that he can make up for mistakes. Amazing what this kid has done. He's shown so much poise. And you see that in Adam Fox also. These two kids, really, the pressure doesn't get to them. They seem they don't get rattled. And so I'm very impressed when I see from Miller. Jacob Trouba, I am not a fan of Jacob Trouba. I know that he brings an element to the defense that I think is useful. He is very physical. He is someone that can clear the crease, but his offensive skills have completely eroded. I think when he first came to the Rangers, you saw it a bit, and now he's a guy that is, deservedly so on the second power play unit, and to be honest, I'm not even sure if he deserves that. He's not that quick. He is being paid $8 million per year and is going to be here for another 5 seasons or so. That's already looking like that's going to be a problem for me. And I think with Trouba, I think a lot of fans like him. And I think that his intentions are good. I think he's a hard-working player, but it hasn't been great. So that Neil Pionk and a first-round pick for Trouba, which at the time everyone thought, wow, what a steal, robbery from the Rangers. That has not been the case. And then in terms of the third pair, it's just a slew of different guys. Great to see Anthony Bitetto score the other night against Washington, and another guy from Long Island, from Island Park, and also a Ranger fan growing up. But he's someone that you'd want to use sparingly. Jack Johnson is awful. Brendan Smith, it's touch and go. And I'm sure he'll get back into the lineup. Libor Hajek, I think you want to give him more of a look just because he's young also, but if I had to predict, I just don't think he's really going to make it with the Rangers when you consider all the potential competition that's going to come his way in terms of besides what's already there with Lindgren, Fox, and Miller. So I think the depth on this team is problematic. It's certainly on the defense, and they're really going to have to rely on those top two pairs. But I like overall what I have seen from the young kids. And again, it's more of the Zibanejads and the Trubas and the Stroms and the Kreiders I think that we need more from. Seriously. And it's funny, as much as Panarin has been great, and he has been, he wasn't going to replicate what he did last season. Even he has, in some ways, taking a little bit of a dip. I think the point production is a little bit misleading, but you just hope they can get into a groove. And then as far as the goaltending, Shesterkin is definitely improving. He had a little bit of a rocky start, but you can feel like he's gaining, and his confidence is growing. And then Alexander Georgiev, we're going to see if maybe he plays one of these Boston games. You kind of assume he will, but I would ride with Shesterkin and just see what happens with that. But they're 4-5-2, and again, there are pauses with the Devils and the Sabres, which is affecting other teams. It hasn't really affected the Rangers much. One of the Devils games got postponed, but again, 2 big games against the Bruins, and you hope that maybe they can surprise. I'm not expecting anything too great there. Maybe they split those two. Right? Maybe they can split those games. Rangers have a lot of home games. There's no crowd, but you want to take advantage of that when you get the last change. So definitely wanted to, review the season. With football season going on, I kind of wanted to wait to get into this, but we're definitely going to talk more frequently about the Rangers. Like I touched on, the Super Bowl episode. We'll get into the Yankees a little bit as well, but there's some time. And yeah, I am going to recap. The plan is for the second Bruin game. So like I said, there's a lot of back-to-backs this season, so it can be a little bit redundant, right? Like, for me to talk about the first game, it's kind of like baseball, not 3-game series, but like 2-game sets. So let's see what these Bruins games hold, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys soon.